I'm Anna,
Hi, I'm Jessica.
and this is the Paranoia Pair podcast. We're going to do Jimmy Hoffa today. It's only 8 pages in my notes app.
Okay, so something short.
Oh,
Nothing
yeah.
too long.
Nothing too long, started off
You
with,
wrote it all on your
yeah, I did. I just got my laptop a couple days ago. So, I'm so prepared for this podcast. I got my laptop
well,
a couple days ago.
are further along. Even though we've been planning this for months, and I haven't finished. I haven't gotten mine out of the bullet point prompt yet.
I mean, honestly, you're killing it. I mean, you go from not even finishing one topic to starting.
My first topic's still on bullet points too.
So, Jimmy Hoffa was born on Valentine's Day,
Romantic.
so romantic, in 1913 in Brazil, Indiana.
Brazil.
I've never heard, I saw Brazil when I was researching. I was like, another country. No,
Indiana.
Indiana.
Okay.
I don't even know where that is, to be honest.
Never heard
I
of it.
looked it up, but
Isn't there another one, Columbia, Indiana, like on the way to Angola?
I think so. There's a Paris, Ohio.
Yeah.
I think there might be a London, Ohio, maybe is what I'm thinking of. One of the two. His father was a coal miner who later died of lung disease when Jimmy was just 7 years old. So, pretty traumatic. In 1924, the Hoffa family moved to Detroit, Michigan, in order for his mother to find better work to support Jimmy and his 3 other siblings. And he grew up in poverty in Indiana, which inspired him to become a leader and an organizer. And at 14 years old, Jimmy dropped out of school to work at a grocery store warehouse.
At 14?
At 14. And this was like Great Depression era. So,
Kudos to him.
sending them kids to work is like the norm.
And a warehouse, too.
I know. In 1932, when Jimmy was 19, he successfully held a strike against the company that he was working for better working conditions. And a year later, he joined the Teamsters Union of Detroit, Michigan, and he worked his way up to president of the Detroit section in just 3 years. So homeboy was popping it.
So is this him at 17?
He was 19.
Okay.
And then when he was promoted to president of the section, he would have been 22. After that, he quickly rose through the ranks as the trustee on the board in 1947 and then vice president in 1957 and the entire union's general president in 1957. Yeah, so clearly he had quite the reputation going for him. So Jimmy's union organization adopted the tactics employers used against them. And, what tactics would that be? Crime. Biggie, no biggie. They must comply with the union's requests and enroll their employees into their union or their transport trucks, cars, and even in some events, their houses will get bombed. Yes. So keep in mind, these are things that they're using against the employers because that's what they're doing to them. So these employers they're actually even hiring people to beat the protesters.
A grocery store warehouse?
Yeah, like the grocery store owners and
Little extreme.
just a little. But, I'm not going to say anything about Luigi Mangione right now.
We'll just leave him out.
Yeah. Jimmy gained quite the lengthy arrest record, for fighting with strike breakers and criminals that were hired by the opposing companies and even rival union members to beat them up. And
Pretty thick.
yeah, on several occasions, he even needed stitches.
Ooh.
He ended up getting involved with the mafia at some point in his early years in the Teamsters, because what better way to fight people beating you up than making friends with the mob?
I mean, Jimmy Hoffa, that sounds like a mob name.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, just I feel like you have
I was not surprised when I learned
to
this.
get involved with
Yeah.
that kind of name.
The mafia was very interested in getting close with the unions because it would give them control over money and influence businesses and labor disputes. And Jimmy became close with a man named Anthony Provenzano. He was a leader of the Genovese mafia, and Russell Bufalino, who was the leader of a crime family in Pennsylvania.
I didn't think Pennsylvania crime families.
Yeah, I didn't either, but I mean, like Philadelphia, though.
Okay.
I feel like that's the only. Oh, or Pittsburgh. Hot dogs
Crime families isn't what I'm thinking about.
and isn't that like Pennsylvania Dutch? Like, there's a lot of Amish people there too. Can you imagine the Amish mafia of Pennsylvania? They helped him with his influences and manpower in battles, and in return for their help, Jimmy helped them gain control over pension funds, which they used for money laundering and racketeering and bribery. And
what's
racketeering? Great question. Gotta Google it.
I hear it, but I don't know what.
I Google it like a lot, but you know, that memory that I have. Dishonest and fraudulent business dealing. He also appointed high-ranking mafia members into leadership roles within the Teamsters Union. Tony Provenzano, for example, was appointed president of a community union in New Jersey. And Anthony Giacalone, I don't know if that's how you say his name, but
Sounds about right.
Okay. It's Italian. I have trouble pronouncing American English names.
I'm disappointed you're not using an accent.
Anthony Giacalone.
It sounds more cowboy.
Okay. And Anthony Giacalone, who was appointed control over the Detroit division of the Teamsters Union. In the 1950s, Jimmy's position in the Teamsters Union gave him access to people in politics, and he was a big supporter of President Truman and John Kennedy, who was a senator at the time. He began working with local politicians and lobbied for pro-labor legislation. He seen potential for a strong alliance with John Kennedy and his brother Robert, and he believed in the JFK's platform would greatly benefit the labor unions and financially contributed to his campaign.
I'm not really good at politics, so
I know that Truman and Kennedy were like one of the most well-liked presidents, right?
Other than Kennedy getting assassinated.
Right. Aside from that, you know. His relationship with JFK and his family grew strong, viewing the power they held essential to labor unions. As his ties with the mafia got deeper, Jimmy found himself in a bout of legal trouble, though, because in 1957, there was an investigation committee named the McClellan Committee, and they began looking into Jimmy and the Teamsters' connection with the mafia. The court hearings were a big highlight, and they were a big hit with media. They really hounded on Jimmy's connections with organized crime and accused him of using his power to help criminals. Jimmy, of course, denied these allegations and fought back and did everything he could to discredit the committee's allegations. But Robert Kennedy was set on fighting against organized crime, and the more he learned about Jimmy and his connections, the more he and his brother became suspicious about him and his intentions. But it only got worse. Because in 1964, Jimmy was convicted of jury tampering and attempted bribery in connection of a trial involving Teamster Union members, which Robert Kennedy has helped played a part in. he was really, like, dead set on making an example of Jimmy, and put on, like, a strong front that he was really against these people,
Okay.
basically. Um, this isn't the first time Jimmy bribed people, though. He bribed cops, like state legislatures, uh, prosecutors, public officials, etc., in the attempt to aid many of the mobsters who were being convicted of crimes. No biggie. Um, it was the first time Jimmy was convicted, though, and thanks to the FBI's investigation. Once convicted, Robert had made sure Jimmy would stay in prison despite how popular he'd become with the labor movement.
So it's kinda like
Yeah, kinda. Robert's strong presence and unyielding stance against Hoffa and organized crime dissolved Jimmy's relationship with the Kennedy family. Tensions began to rise, though, and Jimmy wanted to regain control of the Union and push out the mafia's influence as he became increasingly frustrated with the grip they held on the Union's finances. And he became aware that the mafia leaders appointed in the leadership were growing too independent and they were undermining his authority. Those bitches. Jimmy began serving his sentence in 1967, and he refused to give up his position as Union president. I find it hard to believe he was running that presidency
in jail.
in jail. I don't know how he was calling the shots. I mean, maybe he was sending out memos through the mail. In early 1970, Hoffa was interviewed, and in this interview, he defended his ties to mafia members and ex-convicts, basically by saying, these guys know what's happening in this city, and he'd be an idiot not to use that to his advantage to grow his business. Which, I mean, that's not really too far-fetched, I'm assuming that's, like, what everybody else was doing.
Right.
You know? Like, the mob was, like, really powerful at that time.
I can't believe they're gone.
I don't believe it. New York still exists.
In Chicago.
Chicago. And Las Vegas. We'll hit on Las Vegas in, like, a couple sentences.
That's what Vegas is.
Viva Las Vegas. The only really good Elvis song is Viva Las Vegas.
No.
Well, I also like, Jailhouse Rock.
Isn't this kinda like a pedophile or
Yeah, he was a pedophile and he stole all of his songs from, African American writers. Like, there was this lady who he actually stole, like, a lot of his popular songs from. I believe Hound Dog was one of them, which is why, in that new Elvis movie, they had, Doja Cat, do Hound Dog, which I really liked. It was really good. And everyone was like, it's really fitting that the song he stole from a black woman is now being recreated and reversed by a black woman.
Is the new Elvis one, is that the one with Austin Bieber?
Yes. But with these connections and business agreements, Teamster retirees were paid generously through their pensions, like some of the best in the country, and people were actually quitting their jobs, even professors at well-known universities, to become long-distance truck drivers because it was double what they were making at their original jobs. That's not all, though, because Jimmy was completely in charge of the money coming in from investors, and he was giving out loans with this money to mob members. And one of those mobsters used his loan to build Las Vegas casinos.
Those were built by mobsters?
Yeah. Like, a lot of Vegas was built by the mafia.
Really cool,
Because,
actually.
it's like gambling heaven.
It also kinda
So
makes sense why prostitution's legal there.
Mhm. And, like, some drugs.
Just a little bit of drugs.
So Jimmy was actually credited into building Las Vegas into what it is today because of these loans. June 1971, he resigned, and luckily, though, December 23rd that same year, he received a presidential pardon from Richard Nixon after serving less than half his 13-year sentence.
So they tried to make an example out of him and then they pardoned him?
Yes, because it was a different president. So Richard Kennedy, the guy who was, I think he was Attorney General. He wanted to make an example of him. But Richard Nixon wanted, actually, I have a whole theory about why he was released. So hold your horses, hold your horses. So he received his presidential pardon from Richard Nixon after serving less than half his 13-year sentence. One of the downsides, though, was that he had stipulations of his pardoning, and he was not allowed to be involved with union activities until 1980. There was speculation that Jimmy's pardon came after Frank Fitzsimmons, the mafia man and close ally of Jimmy, who replaced his presidential position after he resigned. And he was, obviously a mafia man, so he had ties to all that money, and being president of the union, he had access to those funds to make it happen. I don't think that's too far-fetched. He pledged financial support to Nixon's rerun for office. Hoffa did try to fight these stipulations in court, though, but it was ruled that Nixon was justified to put these in place. Jimmy's friends in the union weren't so happy for his return, though, because while Jimmy was away serving his sentence, mob members he planted in leadership roles grew in power and highly benefited from his absence, which made tensions high. So obviously he wasn't running that presidency too good in jail. Who would have guessed?
Didn't have enough quarters for those phone calls.
One to note was Anthony Provenzano. They had many disagreements about union matters, which led to threats and physical altercations. Not good. This, however, didn't stop Jimmy from campaigning to reclaim the Teamsters presidency. It didn't really go that well in his favor, though, because despite him having a loyal following from union members, Fitzsimmons and the mob were against his return, which is kind of wild to think, though, that he would pay into Nixon's rerun for office if he wasn't, willing to work with Hoffa when he was released, why did he have him released?
Yeah. But then also...
Oh, he paid for Nixon's campaign.
Oh, okay, so wait. Kennedy? Nixon had him pardoned?
Yes, so Kennedy put him in jail to make an example out of him.
Okay.
And put, a strong stance against the mob, basically. And then Nixon pardoned him.
Right.
And there's speculation that Fitzsimmons paid into Nixon's rerun fund for his next term of presidency to release Hoffa. He didn't have any support to give to Hoffa, basically, because he started to turn against the mob and was against them being in leadership positions, because he's like, wow, these guys aren't doing what I want them to because they're part of the mob and are going to do whatever they want, Didn't think that one through, did you, Jimmy? It also gained the attention of the FBI, who were continuously surveilling him, and law enforcement, who were interested in exposing the Teamsters' ties to the mafia. In 1975, Jimmy had really ruined his ties with the mafia. He was insistent on regaining power of the Teamsters against the advice given to him, but he was confident he would be able to outsmart his newfound enemies. Things didn't end as well as Jimmy had predicted. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy told his wife about a meeting he had planned for the day with Anthony Provenzano and Anthony Giacalone, in an effort to settle tensions from Hoffa's attempts to take back Teamsters presidency. He arrived at the meeting spot, which was a restaurant parking lot called the Red Fox, at 2:00
AM or PM?
PM. But after waiting over half an hour with no sign of Provenzano or Giacalone, Hoffa left in a car with unidentified passengers.
So he brought He brought other people to this.
No, he had, like, this maroon car. I'm not even gonna bother telling you that it was a Pontiac. Jessica has car blindness. She knows colors, and that's all.
On the colors.
So he drove his maroon Pontiac to the meeting spot, and he left in another car.
Just left his fancy car.
Yeah, I don't know how too fancy a Pontiac is. I didn't look it up, but it's a
Okay.
Pontiac.
Yeah.
So he left in a car with unidentified passengers. When Jimmy didn't return home, his wife reported him missing, and the FBI focused on Provenzano and Giacalone, but they denied involvement and provided alibis. Jimmy's maroon Pontiac was found in the Red Fox restaurant's parking lot, but nothing unusual was found, and eyewitnesses said that they seen him leaving in a car. There was also phone calls made between Detroit and New Jersey's mafia members around the time of Jimmy's disappearance. Despite efforts, Jimmy Hoffa was never seen again. And there are lots and lots and lots of conspiracy theories about what happened to Jimmy. And so
Well, why did he? I guess I want to know what the car was and why he got in.
I think he might have known them, especially if it's part of the mob that Provenzano and Giacalone ran. I would assume that he would know them because he did appoint those people in powerful positions within the union.
Okay, so Jimmy isn't like a bad. Well, okay, Jimmy's not like a murderer or anything. He's just like
Debatable. Debatable.
well, does okay. So after this
He,
point,
I do believe that he did send out hits against people.
so but after this point, we don't know Jimmy's.
I mean, he's dead. He's definitely dead now because if he'd be over 100.
Well, okay, fair enough.
During this time, though, nobody knew because there's no evidence of like malice in his car. You know, he just basically disappeared. And like, I don't think surveillance cameras were a thing back then.
Sounds like Anthony.
Yeah, and the Tonys.
Tony's got rid of it.
Yeah, he actually was like really close friends with Anthony Provenzano, so he definitely would know members of the mob of his division. So the most popular theory and the most accepted theory is that Anthony Provenzano ordered Jimmy to be killed after his relentless attempts to regain power in the Teamsters, and that would put the mob in jeopardy of being exposed, which, isn't much of a given.
Well, also, I mean, what's a grocery store guy got to do with the mob? I'd be pretty mad if he was trying to boss me around. I was like, the mob?
Yeah. So that's not too far of a reach, given that Jimmy was heavily being watched, and he did threaten to do anything necessary to take back leadership in the union, even if it meant he exposed the mob. So, obviously you can see why tensions were high between those people.
He seemed very loyal.
Yeah.
His friends seemed along the way.
He also refused to work with Provenzano, and he belittled him in public. So, Jimmy, you're not really...
If I met someone like, I'd be terrified.
I would be buying their kids' ponies.
Yeah. I'm not going to be belittling them.
The unidentified people in the car that picked up Jimmy, an eyewitness later identified the men as
the unidentified men have been identified?
Yes, supposedly. There was an eyewitness who identified the men as Salvatore and Gabriel Brugalio and Thomas Andretta. Who are these guys? They're only associates of Anthony Provenzano. No big deal, no big deal.
I guess by the last names.
Yeah. Well, there was also Anthony Giacalone.
I'll be honest, I can't.
The two Anthonys.
Okay.
One was... Okay, so Anthony Provenzano is basically in charge of the Genovese mafia, and then Giacalone is part of a New Jersey-based mafia.
Where's the Genovese?
Genovese, I believe, is Detroit. Because he was
Detroit, Michigan?
Mm-hmm. Because he was placed in a leadership position there. And then Anthony Giacalone was placed in a position of the New Jersey Teamsters.
Such a pretty name for the mob in Detroit.
I know. Although a trial was never filed because of lack of factual evidence, and that's like gonna be a big thing surrounding these other theories. So, theory number 2 is actually another popular theory. Um, it's believed that his body is buried under the New Jersey landfill. In 2021, Frank Coppola confessed on his deathbed that when he was a teenager, his father, who was a mob-connected landfill worker, and his coworker, they were approached by a black limousine, and they talked to the person inside and pointed to an area of the property. And Frank's father was upset that the landfill was where Hoffa's body would be buried because it was already a place that police constantly had eyes on.
You know, that's actually kind of ingenious to have like a member of like the mob working at the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be like an ingenious way to help get rid of bodies.
Right. And so he said that his father was not very trusting of anybody. And so he picked a different spot than the one that had been selected. Um, a spot that was owned by the state. So he had the border of his property on the other side was state-owned property. So he went over to the state-owned property with his excavator and he dug a hole, placed Hoffa's body that was in a steel drum, and then he placed about 15 to 30 chemical drums on top of that.
Jesus.
So they're gonna like maybe open a couple and be like, oh, these are just like chemical drums.
Just put them back.
Yeah. No biggie. We're just burying chemical drums. New Jersey. He also placed bricks and dirt on top, and then just below the surface, he placed like some kind of marking. But he said that he would not disclose what that marking was unless police were interested. But like homeboy's dying, so he did. I do believe that he did tell them because the FBI actually searched that area and found nothing.
He's moved.
He might have been moved because he did have a coworker. I don't know if he trusted that coworker though. So, but he was also the guy who confessed. He was a teenager at the time, and he did not know any of this until like after his dad died. I think in like 2008, he found like a note or something,
Okay.
and that's how he knew about it. Another burial theory for number 3. Jimmy Hoffa was potentially buried under the Giants Stadium. The Giant Stadium was under construction in the mid 1970s, and this theory suggests that his body was under the concrete. The mob did have influence over not only construction projects, but also the construction unions. And in fact, the Teamsters Pension Fund, that often gave out loans, often funded and supported development projects that were linked to the mob. And so, potentially including the construction of the Giant Stadium. So it was under construction at the time of his disappearance. So I would say it's not too far-fetched to believe that, but it was demolished. Many informants have made comments and hinted at this theory. Donald Francos, who was a mob member, even claimed that Hoffa was buried under Section 107 of the stadium. However, there was no evidence to this claim, and the stadium was demolished in 2010. But the FBI did not find any remains during the process. Tons of people are like, hard on this theory. They're like, they must have missed something. He was definitely buried there. I don't know.
I think
How-
like X-rays, like up
I
underground.
do. Yeah, I do believe they have like they could. I don't actually know if it would like go through. Does it go through? Can it go through concrete?
I'm not very intelligent.
I'm not.
I just assumed.
Another theory explains the lack of physical evidence, though. One of Jimmy's associates and mob enforcer named Charles O'Brien was seen driving the car that he borrowed from who other than Anthony Giacalone's son that was linked to Jimmy's disappearance by FBI forensic analysis. So they did forensic tests of this car that he borrowed, and they confirmed that there was evidence that Jimmy was in that car.
Ooh.
I don't know though, because the so-called evidence is dog hairs and Jimmy's scent, which I don't know. How can you define somebody's scent? Like, unless it was investigated, like, pretty close to when he disappeared.
So the only evidence is his smell?
Yeah, and dog hair.
How's that dog hair? His dog?
Actually, there was a case that I heard about one time. There was actually a episode, I don't remember what it was. I think it maybe was Forensic Files, where there was cat hair found at a crime scene, and one of the suspects has a cat. I think they did DNA on the cat hair and the hair of the cat, and they matched.
That's how that'd be actually kind of special.
Right?
Like your cat, I guess, kind of outing them.
Mm-hmm.
So why did they have your?
It was at
You know
the
what?
scene
No.
of the crime because you have a
I
cat.
was gonna
There is
say,
cat hair all
I'm
over
covered
you.
in fur all the time. Never mind.
Okay, so the so-called evidence is dog hairs and Jimmy's scent. I don't know. I honestly, and the dog hairs, okay, fine, but Jimmy's scent, I don't know. It's claimed that O'Brien drove Jimmy to his killers and then transported his body to Central Sanitation. And Central Sanitation was a garbage disposal facility in Detroit that, who guessed it, had connections with the mob.
What?
This plant stopped operations in the 1980s, though, which made investigations into this theory difficult. And Frank Sheeran, who wrote a memoir called I Heard You Paint Houses, which is basically about how he killed Jimmy Hoffa. There was also a movie that was made based on like his recounts and everything and like his life called The Irishman. I watched it. It was really good. It's so long though. I think it's like 2 parts, and the 2 parts are both like maybe 2 hours long or something. It was so long, but it was so good. So basically, I heard you paint houses is code for I heard you kill people.
I was
Because
wondering
you're
what the
painting.
correlation was.
Yeah, because you're painting. Like when you shoot somebody, the blood goes against the walls, so you're painting the walls with blood. Basically, in this memoir, he recounts that he shot Jimmy in a house in Detroit, and then the mob disposed of his body, which would align with this theory. And in interviews, Richard Kuklinski, who was a hitman for the mob, yes, Kuklinski, and he claims that he was involved in transporting Jimmy's body to be destroyed.
Okay.
They did control many locations that were capable of incinerating a body, and it wasn't uncommon for this method to be used because it destroyed all
Everything.
evidence. So they used this method many times to destroy evidence and their targets after they, come out. So the FBI recognizes that this is very possible, but it's never been confirmed due to the lack of evidence. Obviously, because, I do believe this theory, though. I think this is like one of like the strongest theories that there is. Personal. So not to mention that there have been many supposed claims at what happened to Jimmy. So, the FBI recognizes that this is very possible, but it's never been confirmed due to lack of evidence. And not to mention there have been many supposed claims at what happened to Jimmy from mob members. Some are more plausible than others in the fact that the central sanitation plant closed down and was dismantled before the FBI was able to investigate claims, making the confirmation of this theory basically impossible. And the last theory that I'm going to cover is the Witness Protection Program. Jimmy had tons of information and knowledge about mob involvement in the pension fund and in the Teamsters just in general, thanks to him, obviously, because he appointed them. And all this information was valuable to the FBI. And if we remember earlier that tensions between Jimmy and his mafia buddies were incredibly high, and he did say he would conspire against the mafia, but there's no credible evidence to support this theory, and in my opinion, it really goes against Jimmy's personality and character, and I don't think he would have given up all the information without getting what he wanted out of it, because he was so gung-ho about going back into his leadership position within the Teamsters Union. I don't know if he would.
Sounds like Jimmy should have stuck with the grocery store.
I don't think Jimmy would have given up all that information without getting what he wanted out of it, because after all, that's what led to his involvement with the mob.
But maybe he realized that he had, like, nowhere else to go,
Yeah,
and so
true.
maybe he did give it up, and that the people in the car
Mhm.
well, I guess that would be kinda weird, because why would he agree to meet up with those people? Meet
Yeah.
up with Anthony and then, like, go away with somebody else, so I guess
Yeah. Well, I mean, they also didn't show up, so maybe he was just like, "Hey, these people didn't show up, so I guess I'm gonna, like."
I was gonna make it right, but then
I don't think he would've given up all the information without, getting what he wanted out of it because after all, that's what led to his involvement with the mob, and basically, he I wouldn't say he was totally bad because he did get involved with the, like, the mob and stuff, but, like,
I would get
he
involved
did
with
it
the
to
mob if it
benefit, like, workers, basically, and the workers, after they retired, their pension funds were, like, mint. You know what I mean?
See, I thought going into this that Jimmy was gonna be, like, a killer, like, a bad, bad guy, like, he was gonna be,
Mhm.
like, a serial killer, but I do kinda feel bad for Jimmy now.
Yeah,
He did kinda do it for the good.
he did.
We all need a Jimmy in our companies.
Nobody's perfect.
What murder?
What hitman? And that's Jimmy Hoffa.
I'm really sorry that Jimmy Hoffa had it.
Yeah.
Maybe he lived a good life. Him.
Of I don't know.
Well, Jimmy, you should have stuck to the grocery store,
Yeah.
but all those people who got good pensions are very thankful,
Mhm.
and hopefully you have a good grocery store warehouse in the afterlife.
With as many strawberries as you wish.
All the strawberries, all the good cheap price strawberries.
Thanks for listening to our podcast.
We hope you join us next week again.
Hopefully. I don't things are still changing because in true ADHD fashion, we're just winging it.
Except Anna's really good at hyperfixating.
Yes. That's honestly probably the ending that stays with us.
Anna has the hyperfixation ADHD. I have the one that doesn't finish.
Thanks for listening to our podcast.
Please join us next week.
Things are likely to change. We're still figuring things out. We did kind of, go about this on like a whim, but I did plan. Did I plan all of the things? I've only planned the furniture.
Looks very nice.
Thank you.
We won't make the baby a regular occurrence.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Have a good week. Thank you.